So when we left off the last time, and this, we're finishing section 9, which was the articles dealing with wombs for rent and surrogacy contracts and sort of some modern family issues. I told you that we would post online some of the forms and agreements that Alina was nice enough to get for us from IVF, right?
Well, we're a pharmacy, we're a fertility pharmacy, but we work with the clinics, and Boston IVF, the clinic in Waltham, is one of the major ones right now in the Boston area.
So if you look online, if you wanted to look at some of the agreements that they required as well, to start to think about some of the issues with respect to surrogacy, I wanted you to also think about, in view of the cases and the like, and if you look at the cases, we've got Johnson versus Calvert, and then we've got Culleton versus Beth Israel, which is a mass case that really just deals with the name issue that's related to the surrogacy part of it. And then we've got a couple of other Massachusetts cases that I didn't give you, but there's not a lot in this area, frankly, in Massachusetts. Mass and New Hampshire, both of them will recognize surrogacy contracts under certain situations. The problem comes in as well, though, in Mass at least, is that as a general matter, the baby has to be born, and there has to be a sort of a cooling off period before that child can be released to the, I'm going to say the procreative parents, the parents whose idea gave birth to the child. So I want to tie this into the contracts, personal services, and enforcement that we saw before, and I'm wondering, the medical providers have all sorts of forms and concerns about what should and shouldn't be in there and what restrictions they could have, and they make pretty clear that they're not going to find the donors for the eggs, they're not going to find the surrogates, but they can help to put you in touch with people who will help to do both those things. So I'm wondering, from a standpoint of personal services, contracts and the like, when we look at that stuff, I'm wondering how you as a lawyer are going to do, would protect people who are contemplating such activities. And a couple of the things I want to specifically ask you about is, from time to time I've actually seen over here on the board out here, is that they were looking for egg donors and asking for donors who would be willing to sell their eggs for a sufficient sum. And I've got an article here, this is from March 2010 from the Globe, and it's talking about average compensation offered to potential egg donors in 105 college newspaper ads in spring of 2006. And they range from anywhere from $3,000 to $40,000. I'll read you the first paragraph. It says, the Harvard Crimson was one of 3 college newspapers that ran an identical classified ad seeking a woman who fit a narrow profile. Younger than 29, with a GPA over 3.5 and an SAT score over 1,400. The lucky candidate stood to collect $3,500 if she donated her egg for harvesting. Does any of that worry you, that we can pick and choose, or that we can sell our genetic material, and depending on the buyer, you're actually going to be writing these agreements and then somehow seeking to enforce those agreements? I've got 2 more things I want to ask you about. And then there's other articles about, obviously, the ethical issues involved with some of these issues. There was a doctor up somewhere in New York who ran a fertility clinic, And a number of years later, they were trying to figure out why half the town looked like him. No, really, and he was acting as cutting out one of the middlemen here in the process, and so he was using his own sperm in order to be able to save some of the expenses. And then, you know, this headline here is customized embryos promise brightest, most beautiful. I'm just wondering if, oh, here, this is the one I took down. Here it is. Here's the one I took down from the wall. It was right over here. Loving couple in search of caring egg donor, looking for a healthy, non-smoking woman between the age of 21 and 28, must have brown hair, brown eyes, prefer Greek, Albanian, or Italian descent. Compensation offered, $5,000. To apply, or for more information about becoming an egg donor, please contact, it gives a name, and it says Choice Donations, Inc. And this is actually, the price probably has gone up. This is from April of '05. It was on the bulletin boards. I mean, that's, so, and then, that's just an interesting cover from the Globe. It says, looking for Mr. Good Sperm. Where the idea is to, obviously, to have a child, but without the personal entanglements that sometimes my side of the table brings to that exchange. So, here's the question. Here are the questions. And you jump in wherever you want. A lot of them say, IVF says we're all going to talk about this, is that at some point they're going to have to see a lawyer to further define what the terms of those contracts are. And so I guess my question to you is, what are the terms of those contracts that you will write? Or will some of you say, oh, I'm not going to write it at all? It almost seems a little bit like, you know, creating this master race when we can decide I want over 6 foot, blonde, blue eyes. Go ahead. Jump in.
I just don't think, I don't really see the problem with looking for a specific type of person in that situation. Because if you're looking for like a mate to have a child with, it's the same thing. You know, so I can't have a baby, why shouldn't I be allowed to?
And should be able to pick and choose down to, I mean, were you uncomfortable at all with GPAs and SAT scores and?
Well, I think that's a bit much on their part asking for it,
But if I'm gonna, but.
But I may not want to marry somebody who is getting that.
I didn't hear that.
She said is an idiot.
Well, it's an interesting, okay. So that's, okay, so that fact, that's,
Like
how is it different, I guess?
It's no different than saying you want him to be a healthy person with no like history, you know, health issue history.
It's no different?
No.
When I say I want someone 6'3" and that.
It's a characteristic of that person, and you know why, you know.
Society doesn't own them. People own them. If a person wants to share their DNA with somebody, I think it should be their decision.
Go ahead, Geneva. I'll work around this way.
Not in every case, but I'm sure in a lot of cases they're trying to find somebody who is similar looking to them, or ethnicity, like with that one.
Yep.
They probably don't want their child to grow up wondering why they look completely different, or maybe aren't as smart as both of their parents or something like that. So I don't think it's that much of a problem.
So you would write such provisions within, or you would assist in this regard? Would anyone say, no, I'm a little trouble, we're going too far? Karen, you have your hand up.
So, two things. For when your argument has validity, and I can understand that. But when you take away the randomness of birth, don't you risk the chance that we all may choose the same things then? That you take away the randomness of life? You're creating a society where we could all be taught, you know, we could all want the same things, rather than randomness, which makes us all different.
I think choosing a mate is biological and random, but so when you can't choose a mate, like you know, like a man, like that's the alternative.
Then we have to really qualify it, and when we qualify things to such a level, isn't there tendencies that people go over those lines, you know, and we create?
I think maybe, but I don't think it's society's place to tell somebody what to do with their body.
No, but we're not telling them what to do with their body, we're telling them what to do with the life that they're creating, not their body, but they're creating another human being.
But that creation.
And as
has
the
to be
mother of
body.
adult children, I know that they're very separate. You know? You know?
Go ahead.
I'm
working this way, Scott, I'll get you.
First of all, because I've been dealing with this for like 3 years, I worked in that environment, so I went in there thinking this whole selection, what you want is just bizarre. I'm like, how can you, go in there and just pick and choose, but.
Because they have pictures too, right?
Right, and then, but after working with, because I met a lot of the donors and a lot of the recipients, and a lot of them are anonymous actually, so they don't know each other, they just put the description in. But after meeting with them and kind of speaking with them, I think that yes, it should be random, people having children, but at the same time, for the people that cannot have children, and it's the same with adoption, because when you go to adopt, you obviously pick also kind of what you want. So for the people that can't, if given the choice to pick what they could possibly have, I think that there's nothing wrong with doing that.
Can I say one?
Yep.
It's a tough argument, because you do see both sides of it, which is why you're gonna be lawyers.
Well, part of it, I think the interesting perspective that I hadn't heard before when we've had this discussion in other years is it that much different than when you guys look for a mate, right? I mean, is it, you have certain things in mind, and the fact is you're probably not likely to change that a lot. You're all professional people, and what your interests are your interests. So I'm not so sure, I haven't heard that perspective that Laura advanced before, is that because I guess what I worry a little bit about is the sense, and I love my 3 children, that if you think you're building a master race, you're likely to be in some level of disappointment there. But right, that's just the way it is.
Yeah, but their point is good though. What woman, let's say, I don't mean to single out the women, but probably same with the guys, how many women go out going, gee, I'd like to find a guy that really doesn't look good and has a lousy job. I mean, they line up for somebody like that.
Not usually high on the list.
You're usually like selecting a certain, and everybody, in the randomness of it still happens because not everybody wants somebody that's 6'3" with brown eyes or blue eyes and long
Right.
hair, so you still
Right
get
now.
the random, so because as individuals, we all have that perfect person is somebody different for all of us. So it may be that they're looking, one couple's gonna come in and say, we want a cute little child, and so we want somebody that's no taller than 5'5". So they have, I think, they have every right in the world to, get as close to what their ideal, I mean, and let's face it, nothing ever turns out exactly, especially with this.
That's chance.
I
I
think
said
you're
I
on a
work this way, so let me come in. Go ahead.
I think that choosing based upon things like ethnicity certainly makes sense. And yeah, that's the same thing you would do as in the natural process that we're all familiar with and comfortable with in terms of selecting a mate. But, going beyond that, we may be now going more into the ethical issues, but what do you do when, that child doesn't live up to the expectations because of the GPA, or the talents or other things that someone was looking for, in a donor? Those things just don't, pass on to the next generation necessarily. So I think it's not a big deal to say, well, I want a donor that's Greek. Chances are you're probably Greek, and you would look for a mate the same way. And, unless the child ended up Chinese or something, you wouldn't have a problem. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm mostly concerned with the ultimate rejection. We're going to just throw these kids away and go back and get another one?
Well, you're looking too far into it if you think. I think that it just
If it
increases
happens-
the odds that you'll have a more intelligent child if you put out some parameters.
I
And some people probably wouldn't put out that parameter.
I don't know how much,
Right.
I don't know how much evidence there is of that.
Well, I think it's
Well, but one of
unlikely
you
that
has already
anyone's
advanced the
gonna-
notion that you would want health history. I think someone
Right.
said that,
I
right?
did,
So,
yeah.
so if health history, there are some baselines we're going to be looking for as well. Go ahead.
As someone who has used technology and purchased sperm, I have 2 beautiful daughters, put it so bluntly.
And sperm costs a lot less than the eggs. right?
Why?
Still, the
Because you can get it for free.
One is a significantly less invasive process.
But the whole process ain't cheap, I can just tell you that.
The whole what?
The whole process isn't cheap.
Right.
And I think that, you know, when someone wants a child that bad to go through those extra hoops that perhaps some couples don't need to, they want children significantly enough, and I don't think you're gonna be looking at someone that's like, oh, your eyes aren't blue and your GPA
Right.
isn't quite
That was
high
my
enough.
point.
My daughters have very different personalities and are very different people, and I love them both, and I can't imagine a parent that would go through that and say, this isn't what I thought it was gonna be. I'm sure it probably
That
would
would-
exist, but I think more people would be more inclined to say, I'm just grateful to have a child.
Did you look at the pictures?
I
I had a very
Of
close
course.
friend who had a child this way, and she went through all the pictures. She wanted to make sure that, both from a standpoint of ethnicity, that the child fit in with the family, as well as she was looking for, she would be the first to tell you, she was looking for someone good looking. She wasn't going to have her offspring.
Right, but everybody, the point is everybody finds something different.
Oh, well,
attractive.
I think that's right, Frank. I think that's right.
You're gonna
That's
seek
no-
out the same type of person you probably would if you could have a personal relationship with that.
Let me get Laura's point, then I want to ask you some of the legalese parts of it. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm actually eating.
Okay, then I'll come back to you. What about the money aspect of it? I mean, obviously, one of these articles said something about $40,000 for an egg, the right egg, obviously. You have to buy sperm. The process, just to go through this process, isn't cheap. Any type of assisted reproductive technology gets enormously expensive. Are you comfortable assisting with the purchasing of the genetic material, the purchasing of the incubator? Because there would be some that would argue that to some extent, is economic exploitation of some.
Are you including the technology in that fee or just the material?
I'm saying,
Or is it the whole process or just the material?
well, I'm saying the whole process, right? Because I really do want to know about this, because the Mass case specifically makes reference to payment for the surrogate and all the rest of it. And these are issues that the courts are somewhat troubled with in debate. Is it okay to pay for the egg, the sperm, the surrogate, and to pay for what, how much? And at what point are you worried that there is some level of exploitation to it? Should it be limited to people who can't have children otherwise? Or it's just for convenience, I don't want to look like that, take my egg, get some sperm, you carry the baby, I'll talk to you in 9 months? I mean, are you prepared? I'm just wondering whether the economic aspect of it at all concerns how you would either watch for protection in the area as well in writing the agreements. And then I really want to ask you what specific provisions you're thinking about putting in the agreements. Go ahead, Geneva, you had.
I personally don't have a problem with the economic aspect. The materials are different. The whole entire process is the same thing as getting a transplant. You have to pay for that too. So with regard to paying for the actual egg and sperm, I understand that's different, but at the same time, you're basically enticing people to help others have children. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because it's helping parents who couldn't have children otherwise, and no one's being harmed by that.
Go ahead.
And also the cost aspect, I don't think that anybody would really go into it unless they absolutely had to. I don't think anyone that could have a child would say, no, I opt for this option, because Massachusetts is actually one of the few states that even covers IVF procedures in general. And
Through insurance.
Through insurance,
Right.
right. And they don't even cover the donor-recipient parts with the surrogate mothers, actually. So that people are paying out of pocket most of the time, and those costs are basically anything having to do with the transaction itself, but also while the surrogate is carrying, the child, they have to pay for all the medical bills and anything necessary for the mother and making sure she's healthy. So these bills are ridiculous. Like some of them near, 100,000 at least. and then there's the medical side of it. We're just dealing with the pharmacy and medication side.
And we haven't dealt with your fees yet either.
Right.
Not really, right? Because
Yeah.
that, obviously, that agreement that you're putting together is very important as to how and when, if there's problems. Go ahead.
I don't have a problem personally with paying, no, I don't want to say personally, as an attorney, I would create the document. But I also think that there's an equal protection issue here, because what happens to people who can't afford it, who would be good parent, a good mother, a good father, but they can't afford this whole process, and insurance doesn't cover it, and maybe not, in Massachusetts, that may not be the case because we are Massachusetts, but in other states, isn't that an issue?
It costs a lot more than $40,000 to raise a baby, so if you can't, or to raise a child.
Yeah, but-
So if you can't afford that
Okay.
additional, that upfront cost,
Then you
I mean,
can't-
that's something that you should weigh. I mean, you're going to say,
But don't you
okay,
think-
well, insurance should pay for them to be able to have a baby that they can't afford to pay to have the in vitro or whatever, so that later on down the road, we can give them food stamps and TANF and Medicare and Medicaid and whatever.
But
But I
maybe
think
they
you're
have
too
enough
far.
money for one.
I
They
think you're
have
too
enough
far
money
off the
for-
edge, because I
yeah.
think many couples, when they first have a child, can't really afford that child. But eventually they work and they can afford it. Not every child.
I work
And
very
can't-
hard and I can't afford my 17-year-old, but I do it. I mean,
Right, but we're living, we're living in a very bad economic time.
What? I know, but I mean, I think that you have to consider that. I mean, if you're in a position, especially if you're looking at maybe paying someone $5,000 for an egg, if you can't come up with $5,000,
Yeah, but I think that it's often more than $5,000 for one egg cost.
well, I don't know, because I would never donate my eggs.
Well,
but-
the $5,000 fee is just for the extraction.
Right.
But prior to the extraction, there's fertility drugs and the various injections that are gonna take place over a period of time. So there's both time and drugs that are involved prior to that. Then the procedure itself, as I understand it, it's obviously just simply not as simple as
Right.
getting the donation of sperm. So I think that fee that I referred to in the articles, that's for your fee of giving up that service. They're giving up your eggs. But there's other expenses that are attached to it as well. So the three is a relatively modest sum compared to some of the ads I've seen. If you actually went online, I'm sure you'd find much bigger numbers. Let me just ask you about this, because I want to know what provisions you're going to put into the contract. And the Massachusetts case, which is RR versus MH, and my little checklist that I'm going to go through with you in a minute says one of the things that perhaps should go into the agreement is that the statement that the mother is unable to sustain a pregnancy. And the Massachusetts case actually makes reference to that as well, where it talks about that they would enforce surrogacy agreements, and they're going to do it in a narrow range of circumstances, but the court adds the factor that the father's wife be incapable of sustaining a pregnancy. So I guess, and you sort of push it off, but would that be a requirement? That we can't have one otherwise, so that's why we're doing this process, or we're simply doing this process because we're doing this process? Does that matter to you?
It's not a requirement in most, when you look at many of the celebrity people that we read about who have babies, they could physically have a baby, they just don't want to alter their bodies.
So does that affect this, right, does that affect your think? Let me give you some of the provisions that they say should go into it, and you could tell me what you think of them. Date of the agreement, obviously. Names of the parties, including both prospective parents and the surrogate. Is the surrogate's husband, partner, is he also party to the contract?
Should be if she's married or has a partner, yeah.
If she's married, he would be.
Well, you could sue.
And if not, would the partner still have to be part of it? Would the partner, it's not in the list, but I want to know, should there be a psychological evaluation of all of these parties before this goes forward? Why do you say definitely like that? Huh?
You don't want somebody who's crazy, squirm or egg. I mean, you want somebody who
So you're saying just in order to use the egg or sperm, you would want some type of psychological evaluation. I was actually asking about the potential surrogate.
You wanna make sure that they're in their right mind when they make are they making the contract, you know.
Well, I imagine there's an
sound.
awful lot that must go into the thinking over the period of 9 months there that in many states do require some form of psychological evaluation.
Well, it's evidence of competency, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Entering into the contract.
See, I'm not so sure it's just competency, it's all the other emotional entanglements that are attended. Go ahead.
I would want it too, because like pregnant, I've never been pregnant, I don't have any children, but I imagine it's a very emotional 9 months, and it's a very emotional occurrence when you have a baby. So we've all seen in TV and heard stories about cases where the surrogate says, yeah, the baby's yours, don't worry about it, I'm so happy to do this for you, but then she has a baby and all of a sudden she wants to keep it, and she can do that in some cases. I don't know if I've ever seen a case where she couldn't, but I want to make sure that through the psychological or psychiatric exam, I'm trying to assure a little bit more that she's capable of making that decision and giving the baby to these parents.
Well, and I mean, again, I don't disagree with you on any of those points. The other thing that some of the states add, and I know it's in your gestational carrier agreement, is that the woman should have already carried a child to term. And I think that's from two standpoints. A, they know you're medically capable, and B, also, then you have some better understanding of what it must be like to do that and hopefully be able to give up the child. Because I would imagine, whether it's my egg or my boyfriend or whoever's sperm, that's gotta, if you birth the baby, that's still gotta be pretty difficult to just give that child away as a general matter without any rights going forward. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that was one thing I noticed about those cases where they had already had a child, and I wasn't thinking of it solely from, they're able to carry a child. I was thinking it as an other saying, oh my God, it's so emotional to carry a child for 9 months, and then had they not gone through that, how could they even comprehend giving that child away?
Well, and I think that's why some of the agreements in some of the states simply require that, so that there is a better understanding of what you're giving up there. Agreement by the surrogate to submit to requested physical and psychological exams. It sounded like you had no problem with that. Health coverage issues. Agreement of the father, mother, and surrogate to the assisted reproductive technology. Agreement as to the maximum number of attempts to achieve a pregnancy. Go ahead.
Do the surrogates commonly have an attorney representing them also due to liability if there are complications, health that cause health problems, or
well, you're the
egg?
lawyer for this wealthy couple that has come to you. You tell me what you think.
I think if you want the agreement to stand, you almost have to insist that they have some kind of representation, or there's got to be a lot of written, there's got to be a lot of evidence that they're well aware of all of the potential problems. Because what about just in the case of donating an egg, if somehow it causes sterility in the donor? I mean, even a donor who might be your best friend is going to donate an egg so you can have a child. I mean, there has to be some awareness that there could be potential, and who's liable for that? The person harvesting it, or do you have an agreement?
If it's malpractice, that would be easy, but if it's just...
both, maybe, if you have an agreement that you'll bear the burden.
I haven't seen that in there, that potential. The risks usually are gonna be borne by the person undergoing the procedure. But I don't know whether that is a likely risk either. But obviously there's always risk to any type of ingestion of any drug.
But I don't know, I'm just thinking, if I were the attorney of the couple,
right,
maybe I would want to write in the contract that any problems or ailments that she gets from the treatment is not on them, to protect. Like, say something.
You want sort of a waiver of liability.
Yeah, if something happens to her down the road because of the treatments.
I want to ask you about Fred's point, though. So now you're the lawyer, and the couple come to you and they say, listen, we've finally been able to take care of this, and obviously it's really not a business transaction to anyone other than you, really, right? This is about things much greater than that. and now you're gonna say, well, we gotta get her a lawyer? Cause I don't know if I'm that couple, whether I'm that crazy about bringing another one of you people who like to fight into this. Right now, we've got a pretty good understanding, why can't you?
Yeah,
Why
but
can't
won't the
you?
agreement stand?
I want it to stand, but I want it.
In court, if she was if the other party was represented?
I don't know. Yeah, I think it's more likely that
In the-
this,
in entering
talk about
into the
informed
agreement.
decision, informed consent, go ahead, Law.
Well, if she had like medical problems after because of the Overthrow procedure, wouldn't the person who did the procedure be like, it would be medical malpractice?
Would it?
Or wouldn't it?
I don't know. My guess is that there are side effects to virtually anything, and especially when we talk about medical procedures, that, and I have the agreement, they're posted, but, I mean, there's language, it's not as broad as I would have thought, actually, but there's language that talks about there's risks with everything. And these are not always successful, and it really is dependent on each person and their response their bodies have, and is all pretty individual. So we almost can't predict anything in this regard, and it's pretty clear that they're washing their hands of much of the issues, and I would think that's what you're likely to do. I mean, there are complications in pregnancies that occur in the regular way pregnancies have occurred for hundreds of years. So this is in fact a minefield. The next one says agreement that the surrogate will not engage in intercourse during the attempts to achieve a pregnancy. That goes in the agreement? So you're going to restrict someone's ability to have sexual intercourse, of course.
When she gets pregnant,
By a husband or
Yeah.
boyfriend, yeah.
Okay, so you can't have intercourse during the period of whatever the attempts are that we're trying to achieve pregnancy. I think sometimes that goes on for an extended period of time. No, really, I mean, like months, years, maybe.
I think that should be in there.
You think it should?
I do think so.
So the surrogate now can't have intercourse for a year or more.
But that's what they're signing up to a commitment, though.
Okay.
And, you know, these people are paying a lot of money to have a child that is, you know, theirs, not her boyfriend.
But are you paying me that money? I'm the surrogate. Are you paying me that money? You're paying the doctors and everyone else? Because now you're taking away something of value to me, and at least some of the cases, Mass being one of them, is very concerned about whether the surrogate is doing it as a means of raising money as opposed to doing it because it's a family member or someone close to you or someone that simply wants to assist you with this endeavor. The Mass does really look askance at and actually this case, they decided it was not an enforceable agreement. And the principal reason was because the surrogate was being paid. And they were concerned about the economic disadvantage that the surrogate was at under the circumstances. So, I mean, there's actually, first, the agreement used money to coerce a less socioeconomically advantaged surrogate to give up a child, much like baby selling. It permitted pregnancy-related expenses to be paid, but did not define the term. That's just what we lawyers do, right? Pregnancy-related expenses.
I just feel like, I understand that argument, but then you want to say when a pregnant woman is murdered and her fetus is killed, that's not a life. Like, the courts are saying both ways. Like, oh, now it's baby selling, but when the baby's in the womb, it's not a life. Like, that's contradictory. I mean, what as a society are these courts going to come out and say that it's life, it's not life? I mean, that's just contradictory. That's a good point.
Well, so you guys, you would compensate the surrogate for her services.
Yeah.
How much? I mean, is there not an outer limit here? Because like my guess is for $250,000, a lot of people would be tempted. No, right? $250,000.
Right, but competition's naturally gonna drive that down.
Okay, but you told me you weren't worried at all about any level of economic exploitation. My guess is there is some level of that to it. If we're really even saying, well, it won't be as high as $250,000, that number will be driven down somewhat. That's still a lot of money. So for a lot of people, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, but it takes a certain kind of woman to want to go to have a baby. Even like for $250, a lot of women aren't going to be like want to change their body and go through the process. So I mean, it still takes a certain kind of woman to want to do that anyway.
But at $250, I'm gonna find more. Don't you think?
Yeah, not really, because a lot of women are more concerned with like their bodies, and they don't want to get pregnant. They don't want to get pregnant, give the baby away, and then be fat or whatever after, and be worried about what they look like. Or for $250, I wouldn't see a lot of women even really considering that.
Really? You don't think 250 is enticing? 350?
We're in inflation.
A million? Jeez, okay, well then that does help. Go ahead.
What about a whole other provision if the donor parents wanted to somehow abort the pregnancy prior, within the 3 months, and the surrogate didn't want to? I mean, could there be a provision there for that? I mean, that raises.
Well, let's
all
talk about both of them during, the next one on this list is agreement that the surrogate will not terminate the pregnancy unless her own life is at risk. And we'll add your provision, agreement that the surrogate will defer to the procreative parent's wishes as to whether to carry the child to term or terminate the child based on the results of an ultrasound or some other testing, which is, well, that testing is in the agreements, right? I mean, especially if we're sort of looking for a master race here, genetic defects aren't on that list, right? So tell me what you think about that, because we looked at those other cases and we talked about, oh, you can't specifically enforce personal services contracts. Well, and you had no problem with someone giving up their ability to have sexual intercourse. Do you have any problem with someone giving up their ability to either abort or not abort that?
Well, I think you
The
would probably want
genetic
to know that the
material of
person
two
that
other
you're
people.
on
I'm
board.
sorry, go ahead, I'm
I said,
sorry.
I think you would probably want to know that the person you were on board with, like, I mean, where they stand with the issue.
Okay, but that, I agree, but that doesn't get us anywhere near where we need to be, right? Okay, so what is your general thoughts? My thoughts on this. But again, things change, right? Once you're pregnant or once I remember when my wife felt the baby move for the first time. It was like, I imagine it is for most people, but it was, oh wow.
You gotta be.
No, but you know what I mean. It's so you all okay with this?
I don't see how you could enforce it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the same
How can
thing.
you
What's the
enforce
remedy?
someone not having
Yeah.
intercourse, and how can you enforce a woman who doesn't want to have an abortion to go to a hospital?
It's damages, right? Breach of
Doesn't
It's
want
just
to
damages.
go,
Yeah, you're
or
gonna get
I want her to
arrested,
go
right?
because there's enough indication that the child is not healthy that I want to terminate it, and the surrogate says no. So are these just provisions that we put in that we don't think we'll enforce? Or, and by the way, what happens when the procreative parents want to terminate the child? Surrogate says no. Child is brought to term unhealthy, needing medical support and money. Who pays?
She's out, she
She
breached the
does.
contract. She has to pay, because she's out, she breached the contract.
So this woman of relatively modest means has to support this child while the people that provided the genetic material just walk away and look for the next surrogate to get involved with it.
They should still have to pay her the $250.
I think so.
Oh, so, well, whatever the fee would be. So even though she breached, at least the terms of the agreement, they would still have to pay the surrogate fee, but they have no obligation to the child that is genetically theirs?
That's probably what they would wish.
Well, okay, but I'm wondering what you think, and what, because that's the problem with saying, well, this part of the agreement isn't enforceable. Well, okay, if it isn't, well then what happens in the event that we have the problems we thought? Whose responsibility is it? And I mean, that was, I don't know, do you
Maybe
guys
that
still
has
have
to
in
be
the package
spelled
the
out.
Bazanka case? The case from California. They wanted to have a child, they took the egg and the sperm, and they impregnated I think it was the surrogate with it, and then about a month in he said, you know what, I really don't feel like a child, I don't want to be married anymore either, I'm out. And then the court...
Can't you include the remedies in the contract?
Well, what's the remedy? Because there are more people involved than just the contracting parties here, because The other group that's involved is the rest of us, because if someone can't pay for this extraordinary medical care, it's gonna be us.
Well,
So-
even the child has a claim against the.
Against who?
Against the parents, against the.
Who are the parents?
Against the people that gave the egg and the sperm, potentially.
So that,
If the surrogate can't afford.
so because that child is born against my will,
Specific performance.
specific performance of what? Can you get specific performance? I mean,
The abortion.
You know, the-
okay, what about that? I want an injunction ordering her to carry out the terms of the agreement the way we said. Either don't get an abortion because the surrogate said, you know what, this isn't for me. I've got better things to do.
Wait,
And so at 18 weeks, I'm going to terminate the child over your objections. Or surrogate says, no, I know you saw something funny on that test. I really don't care. I know this child's fine. I'm carrying it to term. Well, no, you're not. And you're breaching the agreement. I mean, what are our chances? Vanessa Redgrave couldn't even sing for the BSO. And now we're gonna,
it's a special good.
huh?
It's a special good, it's not this, it's not, you know what I mean? That
It is a
comes
special
down-
good, I think.
Right, so that's.
But see,
what
it,
sounds-
but so where do you go with the special good? I think it's one thing to say we're gonna force the surrogate to carry the child to term at that point. And I think it's a different thing to say we're gonna force you to undergo a procedure that you're opposed to.
Right.
Right?
I mean, don't sign the agreement if you're opposed to it. Cause I mean,
But
now
when
you're
we change
trying-
our minds too.
Right, but you're also affecting way more people than just her.
So you would enforce the agreement
Yeah.
by way of an injunction if necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I have my own personal feelings about that, because I think it's really difficult to take care of someone with special needs. And if,
I hear you.
you know,
Now, you realize this, what we're ordering here is, at least in part, what Judge Harms in Norfolk County got in big trouble for. She issued an order that the woman who was, had some mental issues, not only have an abortion, but be sterilized as well. And the Supreme Court just overturned that decision recently, with a very caustic rebuke to Judge Harms, saying, you know, how could you possibly undertake such draconian measures as that? Go ahead.
I think like at the point that the surrogate would say, no, I'm gonna keep this child, I'm not gonna have an abortion, then you need to make a new contract and cancel the other one and make sure that she has liability for any expenses. That's what I would do if I was.
But the likelihood of that person really being able to bear those expenses is probably low, right? I mean, so it's not just a shifting of it, it's how do we actually do it reasonably? And you know, and I'll say it from look at it from a different perspective. If I provided the genetic material, and my wife did, and this is really probably odd thought together, I would think that if we wanted to terminate that child, we should be able to. And if not, the thought of that child somehow being out there with strangers, and I know these are completely inconsistent thoughts at the same time, that would tend to drive you crazy, right? That someone that you have provided birth to, they need your help, and you're unwilling to provide it. That just means you're a creep. No? No, I mean, go ahead, Melanie. I don't know, I mean, it's some deeply troubling issues there.
How is it any different than two people, a woman getting pregnant the natural way, if you will, and the father saying, I want you to get an abortion, I want you to get an abortion. I mean, they can't force her to get one, and later on down the road, he still has to pay child support. So why is that any different?
Well, but
I mean, he's made a choice to participate in that activity that got her pregnant,
Except-
and these people have made a choice to impregnate her.
Well, I'm gonna take the article, what the title of the article, one of the articles was, Wombs for Rent, right? That to some extent, you're agreeing to be an incubator for the next 9 months. You didn't provide the egg, and that seems to be one of the levels of protection here in a lot of these cases, if you start to think about it, is that you really don't want the surrogate necessarily providing the egg, which then would give the surrogate an additional attachment to that child. It actually is very logical as you start to play that out. But we provided the egg, we provided the sperm, we provided the technology to make that work. Really, you are an apartment, you're a room for the next 9 months. Why isn't it fair that you have very little say over what happens with that? And I'll use Geneva's point about that unique good that you agreed to provide that housing for. I mean, is it? Go ahead, go ahead.
I don't think we're a society that's gonna strap somebody down against their will and abort them. Like, you can't really force somebody to get physically to get an abortion. I mean,
Correct.
Well,
you
why
can't-
not?
How?
Why not? That's what it is. It is what you agreed to.
I'm not going. What are you gonna do? Drag me in there kicking and screaming?
Well, do you know, and I've used the illustration before, and I know it's not perfect. There was this, in southeastern Mass, there was this cult where the child was about 7 or 8 years old, found dead in Maine or somewhere. She was pregnant again, and what in essence they did, and they didn't do it as outwardly as this, but in essence what they did is they jailed her for the last 2 months of her next pregnancy. So that, I think, the purpose was, the idea was, we're going to protect that child in the process, the one that's going to be born. I mean, and so why not? Why can't we jail you for the 3 or 4 or 5 months necessary to carry out the terms of the agreement? Go ahead.
We've worked hard over the centuries to establish the fact legally that we're entitled to make decisions about our own bodies. And so I just, I just have a hard time forcing. I understand the couple that provided the genetic material wanting to be able to say what they will with it, but the fact of the matter is, you're going into this arrangement knowing that somebody else's body is involved. So I think legally you just can't have it both ways. Oh, I want to be from day one the child's parents unless I decide I don't want to be. So you have to go in knowing this is going to be your child, and you can have an agreement that that the child will be aborted if it's found to have some defect that you don't want the child for, but also knowing that you can't really enforce that against somebody's body.
And just to finish that thought, though, and that while it's my baby, that if the surrogate at any point chooses to terminate the life of my baby, that is her choice and her choice alone under your logic.
Yes. It's her body.
That doesn't mean she gets.
Well, but it's not just her body at some point, isn't it? You've got ours in it
She
too.
signed to agree to that, I mean, that she's breaking the, so what repercussions do the donor parents have to that? I mean, and all the expectancy and reliance that they had on that baby coming into the world, you know what I mean? But I guess that's why they do the vetting.
No, that's what
They
is
do the
the
whole
answer?
vetting process to make sure
Yeah,
that
but
they're gonna go
all the
through
vetting
it,
in the
you know?
world isn't gonna solve all of these problems. So what is the answer to this question? Well, tough luck, better luck next time?
Well, unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, yes. Because it's still the woman's body. And you would hope that you go into this, that everyone's gonna honor the arrangement, but the bottom line is still, it's a woman's body. You can't force her to have a procedure or not have a procedure against her will.
But if we can't force it, can we punish her for breaking that then? I mean, is there any civil, is there
I
any
would say
money damages or any,
Well, I guess I want to quarrel with the notion of who says we can't force her. I mean, and I understand well the point you're making. Who says? Okay, right up to now, we've had some very well-defined law with respect to the performance of personal services contracts and the argument about unique goods. Who says we can't?
Like some human
I mean-
rights
Well, it's
organization.
like the same argument somebody brought up. So, so somebody's husband gets them pregnant and they decide that I just don't want this pregnancy, can't deal with it. He can't force her against her will to carry this child to term. It's her
Well, that's a question for another day as well. No, really, I did show one time on fathers' rights, and that is the question. I mean, so I would have, none of us men who are married would have any say as to whether our child can be aborted or not, and that really is the state of the law, as you would point out. But does that mean that's a constant thing? Because you can put all these provisions in the agreement, but what I'm hearing you guys telling me is put whatever you like. But at the end of the day, your fate likely rests with some 18 to 25-year-old young woman who let's hope she's stable and And guess I keep my fingers crossed for that entire period, because that sounds like a
Everybody
cost.
has to know the risks going in. There's risks on both sides.
Why can't you put an adoption?
But why should I even bother going to you then? I might as well just, listen, we'll both say, you know, I'll give you the baby when we're done. And we'll both sign it, and if it works, great, if it doesn't, that's it? Lena, that's the best you're gonna do for me?
Okay, so this is what I think. In regards to forcing someone to get an abortion, I don't agree with that, but I do think it's different from keeping someone from having intercourse, because that's an activity that you're stopping them from doing, whereas the abortion is you're forcing them to do something with their body, and I do not think that that is right. However, there is still a contract that they will breach if they don't get an abortion, and I think in that case it is appropriate to have them pay damages like the money that the couple spent on all of that. So I think there should be some consequences that would make the circuit think.
I guess, see,
carefully, but-
I'm thinking that, go ahead. I'm thinking the economic exploitation issue comes into play here again, because, okay, so you give me a $2 million judgment, or whatever you wanted to make it. Who cares?
Get blood out of a
Go
stone.
ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, you can't get water out of a stone. I could volunteer to be a surrogate, and if I breached a contract, they could turn around and sue me, but you're not gonna get any money out of me.
Right.
Well, and that's what's a little worrisome about you guys telling me that we can't put these provisions in, because these provisions about genetic testing and ultrasound, they're all relatively standard parts of the agreements. And the reason that's there is because of the issues then that would be involved with the next step, especially when you think about, I mean, some of the people have fairly specific ideas of what their expectations are of that child, and most of them probably do not involve taking care of a child with special needs. And so then that still then leaves the issue of, okay, so now we've got a breach, but the child is born, and who pays? And okay, so we'll say, oh, the surrogate, you do, but that person may not have the wherewithal to do it.
See, and I also agree that you shouldn't be forcing it's not okay to be forcing someone to have an abortion, but that is the only remedy. If you're going to put that provision in, that's the only adequate remedy, is to force someone to have an abortion. That's why I don't even think that provision should be in there, because that's just not gonna happen if it's against public policy, or if a court's not gonna uphold that. So why put the provision in? That is the only way to ensure that if you don't want to have a child with special needs and you want to force them to have an abortion, or she wants to have an abortion and you want to force her not to, I mean, there's no way of going about it other than specific performance. And she's not going to be able to pay money, so, I mean, don't put the provision in then. You have to put in something else saying who's going to bear the expense of it if somebody does something that's not in the agreement.
Well, I was thinking, I mean, if a couple comes to you and like they're so set on, making this work, but like, having the surrogate abide by their contract, and they had the money, could you possibly build into the contract incentives for the surrogate to abide by their wishes? So like,
Some more cash.
So if you killed your baby, then you get an extra $100,000?
yards,
Yeah.
Well,
If you kill
well,
my
let's be
baby,
realistic.
if you have an abortion and my
Well,
baby is
then
then you would
terminated,
receive the full
then you get an extra
compensation.
$100,000?
We can just word it to the point that either way, the contract's going to be fulfilled either upon the performance of presentation of a live baby or an abortion at the parent's request. You'll get your fee. So we're gonna pay it over with money.
I mean, that's the only other way.
So the financial incentive.
I mean,
Significant
that
financial
opposed
incentive.
to strapping somebody down and hauling them into an abortion clinic. I mean, you have to give and take here.
Well, but it is something that you had counsel on, you had psychological counseling with, you understood what you were engaging in here and what the requirements were, and now you're simply saying, no, I don't want to do it, when, and I understand your personal choice issue, but the repercussions are enormous too.
Yeah, but
right?
we're a society that can't even agree on whether abortion should be legal or not. So there's not going to be many judges, if any, that are going to order and force somebody to get an abortion.
Well, I wonder. I mean, we personally don't think so, but we saw Judge Harms and she got in big trouble for it.
Yeah, now, even now.
She got in big trouble.
So why was
But I think it was the sterilization that got her
yeah.
in the bigger trouble.
Why is that? Did she have a contract or anything, or were they just saying a mentally ill person shouldn't be having a child?
She had a few children in this regard. The parents were worried about her mental state and her ability to care for the child. So her parents petitioned the probate court to try and authorize the medical procedure of someone who was incapable of deciding. And she even went beyond that medical procedure and said, and sterilized us so we don't have to do this again. And the Supreme Court, in a stinging decision, said,
Gave her a lashing.
yeah, they gave her a real lashing. Let me just give you a few of the other things that they talked about in here for you to think about. Restrictions on activities of the surrogate during the pregnancy, which I imagine you wouldn't have that much of a problem with. Agreement that the father and mother will or won't be present for the birth of the child. Agreement, obviously, that the surrogate and her husband have no claim to physical or legal custody. Agreement by the surrogate determination of parental rights upon the birth of the child. Agreement that it's in the child's best interest that he or she be raised by the putative father and mother. Agreement that the custody of the child be relinquished as soon as possible. Agreement regarding the financial terms of the arrangement, including reimbursement or payment for uninsured pregnancy-related medical expenses. Payment for psychological counseling, both before and after, by the way. Payment for maternity wear. Payment for lodging and other living expenses if the surrogate relocates to be near the mother and father. Payment of travel expenses, etc. It's a lot of money. And then the next one is the one that you guys just talked about. Agreement as to compensation should the pregnancy not proceed to term. So that sounds like what we were talking about as a little bonus provision if you agree to carry out the terms of our agreement. Confidentiality agreement, governing law, obviously very important in agreements like this that differs widely from state to state. Statement that the contract constitutes the entire agreement, severability clauses, and then obviously signatures. All of that has to go in there, and I don't know whether, I might have skipped over it earlier, but obviously prenatal care and all the rest of it, and regular medical checkups. Go ahead, Frank.
If you're doing this contract with the potential parents, don't you really have to advise them, given the state of the laws, that much of this is unenforceable?
Well, I wonder what you are going to tell them.
Including the remedy if there's a breach, because most likely somebody that's doing this for money doesn't have the means to pay any kind of a settlement or a judgment anyways, like you had said earlier.
No, but isn't that the risk, is that we go through all of this, we spend enormous amounts on the technology, a lot of money on the lawyer to try and get the agreement done, and maybe counsel for her. But that becomes problematic too, because now we've got people fighting about these very issues, and we're never going to have agreement on any of this.
So my point is that this whole thing, you really have to advise them that it's a matter of trust, and it's a matter, and it's so, it can change because of the psychological aspect of it. You know, it sounds great until that baby comes out of the surrogate, and she looks at it,
and she still has 3 more days after that in Massachusetts to make her decision.
Right, so you really, it seems to me, it's a real roll of the dice, and you have to hope that the selection process in the surrogate is probably the most important part of this whole thing.
Well, and that's why a lot of states, I think, the preference clearly is that it be a family member or someone who is not doing it for compensation.
Right.
Because of the concern that there are significant economic issues attendant.
Right, I would have a hard time, like, advising somebody, hey, let's roll the dice, spend $150,000, $250,000, and, depend on somebody that's doing it for the money who potentially, you can't really enforce any of these.
What are you going to tell me?
Find a family member, either adopt, no, obviously adoption is going to be your own child, so it's different. But,
shaking her head no.
But you really, you really have to, find somebody that you can trust.
But so that's all we're going to do? Because I'll tell you, what I'm hearing is in part, one of the criticisms of us lawyers is that we're deal breakers. Look, my partner and I came to you, we brought you the surrogate, all we want you to do is just reduce it all to writing so that we can go along with this, and that we can have something all squared away. And I'll tell you, I gave similar advice to the person that came into me, is that said, why would you even want to entangle all the rest here? If you're gonna give birth to the child, why create all these other agreements giving someone else benefits to the child and rights that who knows where we are standing 5 or 10 or 15 years down the road? But I could see that advice is, well, not welcome. You're a deal breaker, right? You're a deal breaker. We've got my partner and I, we've got the surrogate. We just want to get this all taken care of.
But if you're going to do due diligence, you have to. I mean.
But so what can you do for us?
Negligence.
How can you keep this together? I mean, listen, one thing we can see is that it differs from state to state. So maybe we should put a choice of law provision in there with a state that's favorable to these types of agreements. Does that mean we would have to execute the agreement there? Because we could do that if that's what was required. I don't know.
You're still not going to be able to enforce half of the things, though. I mean, based on all the discussions. You can't force an abortion. You can't force somebody not to have an abortion, at least in the United States. Maybe you can have them.
I'm not sure. I'm willing to accept that yet.
I don't know that I'm willing to accept that you shouldn't be able to.
No. I don't mean to accept the status of the law. I'm saying I think. Well, let's strike all of that. Let me ask you this. Okay, so you didn't prepare the agreement. Someone else did. They've now brought it to you. Okay, and they said, listen, here's the problem. Okay, she says she's going to have an abortion. The child well, we don't care. Put the testing aside. We don't want her to have an abortion. That's our egg, his sperm. We want her to carry that out. Are you telling me that you could not file that complaint consistent with Rule 11 to seek to obtain some form of declaratory and injunctive relief prohibiting that person from having an abortion, or are we going into court or not?
You can.
Oh, wait, so we're all going to court and consistent with Rule 11. So either it's saying then, in essence, that it's based on existing law or a good faith belief in reversal of existing law, right? Because you have to. You're going to be consistent with Rule 11.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to take the case and go in. I mean, because the law is an ever-changing entity based on what's going on in society, and technology is constantly changing, and attitudes about it are changing. So of course you're going to go in, but you're going to tell your client what mountain we are climbing here, but do it.
But we got a shot.
Like, even if we win,
Yes.
you're still not gonna be able to force her to not get an abortion if she wants to.
Why not?
But I think you.
She can go anywhere and
You
get one.
can't control the anyway, body of that person.
Put her in the
Go ahead.
You have a shot. Your argument is the life of the child.
I don't think you should
That's
do it
what-
anyway, so, I
But
mean.
if you want to prevent her from having, I mean, you may lose because it depends on when they decide birth is life is actually there. But you have an argument that birth was immediate. Birth was at inception. Whether you, and that's your argument. It's not on behalf of the parents. It's on behalf of the
But
If I
parents.
run my five-part checklist, I win, don't I?
Yeah.
Like no adequate remedy at law. Money's not going to make me whole for the loss of this child. The likelihood of success on the merits is I've got a breach of contract, and I've got a clear, unmistakable breach that was before we even entered into this contract. There was both psychological and legal counseling, and it was clear that the parties understood what it is they were contracting for.
You're good till you get to the public policy part.
But wait a minute,
Because public policy is not gonna say force her to have an abortion.
But so that's
or
so
don't
your
let her have
that
one.
part of public policy outweighs all the rest of it. Because your body's a sacrosanct, and no matter what the results may be,
The fact
that's the risk everyone else has to take.
The fact that it's my body outweighs it all.
But it's not just your body. There's someone else in there now.
Yeah, I mean, it's the mother's choice, the mother who donated the egg to terminate that pregnancy. I mean, especially if it's in the first trimester.
The mother
That's
who
when
donated that
you're-
egg isn't gonna die on an abortion table if they're forced to get an abortion.
Right, but that's when your choice.
She could.
Okay, wait. We're saying at least that the mother's life is not at risk as a general matter,
Yeah.
either from carrying the child to term or as
You
a
cannot force somebody to have an abortion, period.
we're trying to prevent her now
You
from
can't
doing it.
stop somebody from having one. You just can't.
Well, I don't understand why you're just saying you just can't, because I'm applying my five-part checklist, and you're saying you win on all four, Professor Coyne, but on
Okay,
five.
what
This
I'm saying to
five
you-
trumps everything else.
What I'm saying to you is, if you go to court and the court says, okay, he meets this, he meets this, he meets this, he meets this, kind of shake me on this, okay, I'm gonna give you the injunction, your pregnant mother is gonna go to another place and she's gonna get her abortion anyway.
Well, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure
You're
that's
gonna
gonna
throw her
happen
in jail?
before.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
For
I'm
what?
gonna throw her in jail,
It's
or
breach
I
of
will make
contract,
sure
it's not
that
criminal
every
offense.
abortion provider within 60 miles has a copy of that order before the end of the day. And her picture.
Good luck.
And I
And
will,
you are not
I will
gonna be able
sue,
to
and I
prevent
will make
it.
sure they understand that.
And you will get a judgment and you will never get your
Oh,
money.
I'll get money from the abortion providers then.
Right.
Well,
I will, no, that's what I'm asking you. You represent this couple that needs your help.
no way.
Go ahead.
I think when you make the decision to be a surrogate in the first place, you're making the decision and a choice for your body right then and there. Then
Right.
you want to turn around and say, no, I have the choice to do this later when you have somebody else's baby inside of you. You're being paid for a service, and when you decide at the last minute, no, I don't want to go through this service anymore, you have now put somebody else in a place worse off than you would be. So I think in
Worse
this
off
type
than
of
I would be
case,
being forced to have an abortion or not being able to have
that
one?
now
They're not gonna be-
now
not gonna
somebody's
prohibit
life,
you now.
something, whether you think it's a life or not. Now they're being lost because you've all of a sudden changed your mind. I think personally, if you make the choice to be a surrogate, you are a rented body. And that baby inside of you does not belong to you. It belongs to those parents.
That's
And if
fine.
and if they decide that, no, this baby's healthy, we want it to go full term, I think a court has the ability to say, no, you cannot get an abortion, and we will do what we have to do to save the life of that child.
Well, what about, I mean, if it's a choice issue, and I can understand the choice issue, the point is, you had a choice, you made the choice, and now you gotta live with the choice.
Right.
So what's the
Right.
recourse? What happens? So what's how do you force that? Is it jail time? Is it what is the, that's what I'm trying to get at. What
You're
is-
gonna
That
throw
should
me
be
in
the
jail
decision,
to
not
prevent me
whether or
from
not.
I'm gonna throw you in jail, I'd have no problem with
I
that.
wouldn't have.
On what though? Based on what?
A contempt of court. Refusal to comply with the court's order, you can be jailed until such time as you comply.
So is
And-
that after she gets the abortion and breaks that, or is that?
No, that's a preventive measure.
So that's the injunctive relief to get.
I'm gonna put her in jail so she carries the child to term.
So I stand in court and I say, okay, I won't get an abortion, you're fine, whatever, I leave there, I go and I get an abortion.
Then you
No,
get put in
because
jail.
you're-
And you put it in.
Then you get
But I
put in
still
jail
don't
for
have a
criminal
baby.
contempt. But you're right, you still don't have the baby, but you'll be jailed, as you should be.
Yep.
Laura?
States, like, they have to have statutes like this, but specifically in New Hampshire, this is a law in New Hampshire, it says there shall be no specific performance or breach by the surrogate of a surrogacy contract term that requires her to have an abortion or forbids her to have an abortion.
Yeah, New Hampshire is actually one of the more forward-thinking states when it comes to surrogacy agreements, especially in New England. New Hampshire is actually, well, we've got a statute, you've got a statutory bar in New Hampshire, so New Hampshire won't be my choice of law. But in New Hampshire is actually, because this is the other part we're going to find, there's a lot of states that won't recognize these agreements whatsoever. And New Hampshire is one, but they have specific prohibitions on some of the provisions that you might put in there. A couple other things to think about. Do I get a bonus for like twins and triplets? No, of course, Fiona. But actually, that is one of the provisions in the agreement, such that additional compensation if there's
What
more
if they
than
didn't want that?
more.
What
Huh?
What if the parents didn't want that?
Well, that gets us back to the area that we don't want to go in again, because they actually can go in and selectively abort some of the other.
Or they could sell the other child.
Right of first refusal.
Apply warranty for-
But I mean, obviously that has to be provided for, because in these situations, there often are multiple births.
Yeah.
So what do you get for 2 or 3? Or we don't want to, what happens with the extras? I mean, no, seriously, this is, within the various agreements, and it talks about, single live birth and the compensation. Insurance policies are often going to be part of the equation as well, because obviously there is a risk of serious injury, of death to the surrogate. The other part of that is, and I gave you the case in Mass, it's the RR versus MH case. which really found that that contract was not enforceable, but it did lay out some of the criteria that they thought was important, and I'll just read them to you quickly. That the surrogate has had at least one successful pregnancy, that her husband give his informed consent to the surrogacy agreement in advance, which is kind of interesting when you guys keep telling me it's a matter of your own personal choice, but they want the husband in on this as well. 3, that the mother, her husband, and the attendant parents be evaluated in advance for the soundness of their judgment and their capacity to carry out the agreement. That type of idea about a psychological evaluation is pretty common. It's actually pretty wise if you think about it, in the jurisdictions that recognize them. And that the intended parents be suitable to assume custody of the child, and that the parties, all the parties, have the advice of counsel, the other factor that you guys added to it. And then the court did add this other factor about that the wife or the mother is incapable of carrying the child to term herself. But the court also recognized the acceptability that quite often the surrogacy arrangements will involve non-traditional families as well. So they sort of fudge the last factor on whether the person has to be capable of carrying the child to term, but not incapable of carrying the child to term. So it's an interesting case if you want to take a look at it as well. The other cases that we've got for our family law part of it this week, I want you to take a look at and start to think about, because a lot of what we do as lawyers will involve, whether we intend it or otherwise, some aspect of family law, or even if you don't intend to do family law per se. There are a lot of issues that come up with respect to restraining orders, commitments, the ability to protect a loved one from abuse. And then if you're going to do divorces, there's an awful lot of issues with respect to name changes, and divorces and adoptions and all the rest of it. So I want you to think about this Burke versus Revo, which I think is an interesting case. And it really starts to get us into, as we move to the end of the semester, about damages and the like. And I think this one is a good case because it asks you to start to think about what are the damages. And we especially saw these last surrogacy cases where people are desperate and willing to pay outrageous sums of money to have a child. What do you get when you get a healthy child but you didn't want one? And I think it's an interesting decision. I mean, should there be recovery for the wrongful birth of a healthy child?
This court said yes.
Yes.
This court does so.
This court says.
No, there's custody issues. I mean, I think both parties should be punished in that case, because then, I mean, where does the child go? The child feels unwanted. Ultimately, DCF will probably get custody, and I mean, that just creates more taxpayers' money. You know, I mean, that's
My
just
brothers and I
horrible.
used to say very cruel things to one another. It's my sister too. Okay. Now, how about mom and dad didn't want you so much, they sued. Are there any public policy considerations at work there, or is that just not part of the equation? I mean, should you be allowed to sue when you've got this wonderful child, God's gift?
I think you should be able to sue, but I like what the court said. That's something for the parents to weigh, because they're the ones that's going to be dealing with that, not the court. You know, as far as the psychological, you know, I guess effect. Because the child may not even care. Who cares? I'm here, whatever. You know what I mean?
Well, but isn't that kind of some baggage to carry around, though? How is that not? How is that not? We all have insecurities. This is a pretty big one.
It's not baggage, because you say to your child before you do this, listen, you're going to go to college. You're probably going to may even have a house down payment because we're going to sue. It doesn't mean.
But so you're going to testify under oath, we didn't want this child. That's what you have to say, right?
Because you want them now. But that's not,
But-
that's not
but-
what this
but
is about.
If you didn't want them, and let me ask that as a general contract matter, you have an obligation to mitigate your damages, right? We spent a fair amount of time on in the surrogacy arrangement talking about the right to choose and all the rest of it. You have a very simple remedy, and it's a lot less than hundreds of thousands of dollars that you seek from the doctor. If you don't want the child, get rid of the child. No?
No, that goes against a lot of people's religious beliefs.
Well, I hear that, of religion, personal beliefs, and all the rest, but it's okay to go sue the doctor for malpractice and seek hundreds, if not millions of dollars as a result of the procedure that went wrong.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
You might get some less damages from the doctor because you didn't mitigate, but you shouldn't be forced to have to do something that's against your religion or your morals or whatever because of someone else's wrongdoing.
But you're not forced to. You have a choice at that point. Just like your argument with the circuit, you have a choice. Okay, if I carry it to term, it's on me, and I don't have damages. If I don't carry it to term, then I can abort it, and the doctor owes me the price of an abortion, and we're done.
Do you have to
No.
pay for an abortion?
Huh?
Don't you have to pay for an abortion?
The doctor will compensate you. Those are your damages. Because if the child's truly unwanted, then you isn't that the solution? Because that's the proper mitigation. Or now you say, no, we can carry it to term and get doctor to pay college tuitions and soccer camps and trips to Disney, sneakers, the whole shebang. Those are my damages. I don't know what the present number is on the cost to raise a child from infancy to, by the way, college or 18? College. Oh, no one else in the family went to college, but he's modeling a doctor's job. Okay, we'll finish this next time, but I want you to, and an offset? Do I get an offset against the expenses? She has both daughters, what would you say?
Two daughters.
Her two wonderful daughters, who she can't wait to leave law school to get home to. Obviously, they bring her great joy, far more joy than teenagers, right? They're not teenagers yet.
They are.
Ah, then you lied. No. But so wait a minute, though. I get a credit for that value, don't I? If I'm the doctor, the cost has to be offset against the value. Right? There's some return to that, to having those two children. Look at the smile on her face. So you got to value that, because right, you got something of benefit that has to come off the cost. Now you tell me how you're going to value her two children, or my three children, huh?
Same way you value other things like your ability to work when you have an injury and things like that.
So tell me. So what do you think? It's like a figure per day? Can we do it per diem?
A day is
Some
probably
days
a
they're not
lot.
working.
No. Often not.